Day 11, Zinj, June 23rd, 1979. 1. Gorilla Eliotinesis. The gorilla corpses lay stretched on the ground, the bodies already stiffening in the morning warmth. Elliot spent 2 hours examining the animals, both adult males in the prime of life. The most striking feature was the uniform gray color. The two known races of gorilla, the mountain gorilla in Virunga and the lowland gorilla near the coast, both had black hair. Infants were often brown with a white tuft of hair at the rump, but their hair darkened within the first 5 years. By the age of 12, adult males had developed the silver patch along their back and rump, the sign of sexual maturity. With age, gorillas turned gray in much the same way as people. Male gorillas first developed a spot of gray above each ear, and as the years passed, more body hair turned gray. Old animals in their late 20s and 30s sometimes turned entirely gray except for their arms, which remained black. But from their teeth, Elliot estimated that these males were no more than 10 years old. All their pigmentation seemed lighter, eye and skin color as well as hair. Gorilla skin was black, and eyes were dark brown, but here the pigmentation was distinctly gray, and the eyes were light yellow-brown. As much as anything, it was the eyes that set him thinking. Next, Elliot measured the bodies. The crown heel length was 139.2 and 141.7 centimeters. Male mountain gorillas had been recorded from 147 to 205 centimeters, with an average height of 175 centimeters, 5 feet 8 inches, but these animals stood about 4 feet 6 inches tall. They were distinctly small for gorillas. He weighed them 255 pounds and 347 pounds. Most mountain gorillas weighed between 280 and 450 pounds. Elliot recorded 30 additional skeletal measurements for later analysis by the computer back in San Francisco, because now he was convinced that he was onto something. With a knife, he dissected the head of the first animal, cutting away the gray skin to reveal the underlying muscle and bone. His interest was the sagittal crest, the bony ridge running along the center of the skull from the forehead to the back of the neck. The sagittal crest was a distinctive feature of gorilla skull architecture not found in other apes or man. It was what gave gorillas a pointy-headed look. Elliot determined that the sagittal crest was poorly developed in these males. In general, the cranial musculature resembled a chimpanzee's far more than a gorilla's. Elliot made additional measurements of the molar cusps, the jaw, the simian shelf, and the brain case. By midday, his conclusion was clear. This was at least a new race of gorilla, equal to the mountain and lowland gorilla, and it was possibly a new species of animal entirely. Something happens to the man who discovers a new species of animal, wrote Lady Elizabeth Frost Mann in 1879. At once he forgets his family and friends, and all those who were near and dear to him. He forgets colleagues who supported his professional efforts. Most cruelly, he forgets parents and children. In short, he abandons all who knew him prior to his insensate lust for fame and the hands of the demon called science. Lady Frostman understood, for her husband had just left her after discovering the Norwegian blue-crested grouse in 1878. In vain, she observed, does one ask what it matters that another bird or animal is added to the rich panoply of God's creations, which already number, by Linnean reckoning, in the millions. There is no response to such a question, for the discoverer has joined the ranks of the immortals, at least as he imagines it, and he lies beyond the power of mere people to dissuade him from his course. Certainly, Peter Elliot would have denied that his own behaviour resembled that of the dissolute Scottish nobleman. Nevertheless, he found he was bored by the prospect of further exploration of Zinj. He had no interest in diamonds or Amy's dreams. He wished only to return home with a skeleton of the new ape, which would astonish colleagues around the world. He suddenly remembered he did not own a tuxedo, and he found himself preoccupied with matters of nomenclature. Nomenclature? He imagined in future 3 species of African apes: Pan-troglodytes, the chimpanzees; Gorilla, the gorilla; Gorilla eliotensis, a new species of gray gorilla. Even if the species category and name were ultimately rejected, he would have accomplished far more than most scientists studying primates could ever hope to achieve. Eliot was dazzled by his own prospects. In retrospect, no one was thinking clearly that morning. When Eliot said he wanted to transmit the recorded breathing sounds to Houston, Ross replied it was a trivial detail that could wait. Eliot did not press her. They both later regretted their decision. And when they heard booming explosions like distant artillery fire that morning, they paid no attention. Ross assumed it was General Muguru's men fighting the Kigani. Monroe told her that the fighting was at least 50 miles away, too far for the sound to carry, but offered no alternative explanation for the noise. And because Ross skipped the morning transmission to Houston, she was not informed of new geological changes that might have given new significance to the explosive detonations. They were seduced by the technology employed the night before, secure in their sense of indomitable power. Only Monroe remained immune. He had checked their ammunition supplies with discouraging results. That laser system is splendid, but it uses up bullets like there's no tomorrow, Monroe said. Last night's consumed half of our total ammunition. What can we do? Eliot asked. I was hoping you'd have an answer for that, Monroe said. You examined the bodies. Elliot stated his belief that they were confronted with a new species of primate. He summarized the anatomical findings which supported his beliefs. That's all well and good, Monroe said, but I'm interested in how they act, not how they look. You said it yourself. Gorillas are usually diurnal animals, and these are nocturnal. Gorillas are usually shy and avoid men, while these are aggressive and attack men fearlessly. Why? Elliot had to admit that he didn't know. Considering our ammunition supplies, I think we'd better find out, Monroe said. 2. The temple. The logical place to begin was the temple, with its enormous, menacing gorilla statue. They returned that afternoon and found behind the statues a succession of small cubicle-like rooms. Ross thought that priests who worshipped the cult of the gorilla lived here. She had an elaborate explanation. The gorillas in the surrounding jungle terrorized the people of Zinj, who offered sacrifices to appease the gorillas. The priests were a separate class, secluded from society. Look here, at the entrance to the lines of cubicles. There is this little room. A guard stayed here to keep people away from the priests. It was a whole system of belief. Elliot was not convinced, and neither was Monroe. Even religion is practical, Monroe said. It's supposed to benefit you. People worship what they fear, Ross said, hoping to control it. But how could they control the gorillas? Monroe asked. What could they do? When the answer finally came, it was startling, for they had it all backward. They moved past the cubicles to a series of long corridors decorated with bas-reliefs. Using the infrared computer system, they were able to see the reliefs, which were scenes arranged in a careful order, like a picture textbook. The first scene showed a series of caged gorillas. A black man stood near the cages, holding a stick in his hand. The second picture showed an African standing with 2 gorillas, holding ropes around their necks. A third showed an African instructing the gorillas in a courtyard. The gorillas were tethered to vertical poles, each with a ring at the top. The final picture showed the gorillas attacking a line of straw dummies, which hung from an overhead stone support. They now knew the meaning of what they had found in the courtyard of the gymnasium and the jail. My God, Elliot said. They trained them. Monroe nodded. Trained them as guards to watch over the mines. An animal elite, ruthless and incorruptible. Not a bad idea when you think about it. Ross looked at the building around her again, realizing it wasn't a temple but a school. An objection occurred to her. These pictures were hundreds of years old. The trainers long gone. Yet the gorillas were still here. Who teaches them now? They do, Elliot said. They teach each other. Is that possible? Perfectly possible. Conspecific teaching occurs among primates. This had been a long-standing question among researchers, but Washoe, the first primate in history to learn sign language, taught ASL to her offspring. Language-skilled primates freely taught other animals in captivity. For that matter, they would teach people signing slowly and repeatedly, until the stupid, uneducated human person got the point. So it was possible for a primate tradition of language and behavior to be carried on for generations. You mean, Ross said, that the people in the city have been gone for centuries, but the gorillas they trained are still here? That's the way it looks, Elliot said. And they use stone tools? She asked. Stone paddles? Yes, Elliot said. The idea of tool use was not as far-fetched as it first seemed. Chimpanzees were capable of elaborate tool use, of which the most striking example was termite fishing. Chimps would make a twig, carefully bending it to their specifications, and then spend hours over a termite mound, fishing with the stick to catch succulent grubs. Human observers labeled this activity primitive tool use, until they tried it themselves. It turned out that making a satisfactory twig and catching termites was not primitive at all. At least it proved to be beyond the ability of people who tried to duplicate it. Human fishermen quit, with a new respect for the chimpanzees. In a new observation, they now noticed that younger chimps spent days watching their elders make sticks and twirl them in the mound. Young chimps literally learned how to do it, and the learning process extended over a period of years. This began to look suspiciously like culture. The apprenticeship of young Ben Franklin, printer, was not so different from the apprenticeship of young chimpanzee. Termite fisher both learned their skills over a period of years by observing their elders. Both made mistakes on the way to ultimate success. Yet manufactured stone tools implied a quantum jump beyond twigs and termites. The privileged position of stone tools as a special province of mankind might have remained sacrosanct, were it not for a single iconoclastic researcher. In 1971, the British scientist R.V.S. Wright decided to teach an ape to make stone tools. His pupil was a 5-year-old orangutan named Abang in the Bristol Zoo. Wright presented Abang with a box containing food. Bound with a rope, he showed Abang how to cut the rope with a flint chip to get the food. Abang got the point in an hour. Wright then showed Abang how to make a stone chip by striking a pebble against a flint core. This was the more difficult lesson. Over a period of weeks, Abang required a total of 3 hours to learn to grasp the flint core between his toes, strike a sharp chip, cut the rope, and get the food. The point of the experiment was not that apes used stone tools, but that the ability to make stone tools was literally within their grasp. Wright's experiment was one more reason to think that human beings were not as unique as they had previously imagined themselves to be. But why would Amy say they weren't gorillas? Because they're not, Elliot said. These animals don't look like gorillas, and they don't act like gorillas. They are physically and behaviorally different. He went on to voice his suspicion that not only had these animals been trained, they had been bred, perhaps interbred, with chimpanzees or, more strangely still, with men. They thought he was joking, but the facts were disturbing. In 1960, the first blood protein studies quantified the kinship between man and ape. Biochemically, man's nearest relative was the chimpanzee, much closer than the gorilla. In 1964, chimpanzee kidneys were successfully transplanted into men. Blood transfusions were also possible, but the degree of similarity was not fully known until 1975, when biochemists compared the DNA of chimps and men. It was discovered that chimps differed from men by only 1% of their DNA strands, and almost no one wanted to acknowledge one consequence with modern DNA hybridization techniques and embryonic implantation. Ape-ape crosses were certain, and man-ape crosses were possible. Of course, the 14th century inhabitants of Zinj had no way to mate DNA strands, but Eliot pointed out that they had consistently underestimated the skills of the Zinj people, who at the very least had managed 500 years ago to carry out sophisticated animal training procedures only duplicated by Western scientists within the last 10 years. And as Eliot saw it, the animals the Zinjians had trained presented an awesome problem. "We have to face the realities," he said. When Amy was given a human IQ test, she scored 92. For all practical purposes, Amy is as smart as a human being, and in many ways, she is smarter, more perceptive, and sensitive. She can manipulate us at least as skillfully as we can manipulate her. These gray gorillas possess that same intelligence, yet they have been single-mindedly bred to be the primate equivalent of Doberman pinschers, guard animals, attack animals, trained for cunning and viciousness, but they are much brighter and more resourceful than dogs, and they will continue their attacks until they succeed in killing us all, as they have killed everyone who has come here before. 3. Looking through the bars. In 1975, the mathematician S. L. Berensky reviewed the literature on primate language and reached a startling conclusion. "There's no doubt," he announced, "that primates are far superior in intelligence to man." In Berensky's mind, the salient question which every human visitor to the zoo intuitively asks is who is behind the bars, who is caged and who is free. On both sides of the bars, primates can be observed making faces at each other. It is too facile to say that man is superior because he has made the zoo. We impose our special horror of bear captivity, a form of punishment among our species, and assume that other primates feel as we do. Berensky likened primates to foreign ambassadors. Apes have for centuries managed to get along with human beings. As ambassadors from their species, in recent years, they have even learned to communicate with human beings, using sign language, but it is a one-sided diplomatic exchange. No human being has attempted to live in ape society, to master their language and customs, to eat their food, to live as they do. The apes have learned to talk to us, but we have never learned to talk to them. Who then should be judged the greater intellect? Bernetsky added a prediction. The time will come, he said, when circumstances may force some human beings to communicate with a primate society on its own terms. Only then human beings will become aware of their complacent egotism with regard to other animals. The Earth's expedition, isolated deep in the Congo rainforest, now faced just such a problem. Confronted by a new species of gorilla-like animal, they somehow had to deal with it on its own terms. During the evening, Elite transmitted the taped breath sounds to Houston, and from there they were relayed to San Francisco. The transcript which followed the transmission was brief. Siemens wrote, "Receive transmission. Should help. Important need. Translation soon." Elliot typed back, "When have." Computer analysis. Difficult problems. Exceed magnitude CSL. JSL translation. What does that mean? Ross said. He's saying that the translation problems exceed the problems of translating Chinese or Japanese sign language. She hadn't known there was a Chinese or Japanese sign language, but Elliot explained that there were sign languages for all major languages, and each followed its own rules. For instance, BSL, British Sign Language, was totally different from ASL, American Sign Language. Even though spoken and written, English language was virtually identical in the two countries. Different sign language had different grammar and syntax, and even obeyed different sign traditions. Chinese Sign Language used the middle finger pointing outward for several signs, such as 2 weeks from now and brother. Although this configuration was insulting and acceptable in American Sign Language. But this is a spoken language, Ross said. Yes, Elliot said. But it's a complicated problem. We aren't likely to get it translated soon. By nightfall, they had 2 additional pieces of information. Ross ran a computer simulation through Houston, which came back with a probability course of 3 days and a standard deviation of 2 days to find the diamond mines. That meant they should be prepared for 5 more days at the site. Food was not a problem, but ammunition was. Monroe proposed to use tear gas. They expected the gray guerrillas to try a different approach, as they did, attacking immediately after dark. The battle on the night of June 23rd was punctuated by the coughing explosions of canisters and the sizzling hiss of the gas. The strategy was effective. The guerrillas were driven away, and did not return again that night. Monroe was pleased. He announced that they had enough tear gas to hold off the guerrillas for a week, perhaps more. For the moment, their problems appeared to be solved.